1925. The world was still reeling in the aftermath of World War I. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had been in power for 3 years. And over the course of those 3 years, as Mussolini's power increased, things like freedom of speech, freedom of press, and political dissension all diminished. Propaganda became widespread, and Italy was officially transformed from a constitutional monarchy into a one-party totalitarian state. It wasn't any coincidence that in that same year, Pope Pius XI created a new liturgical holiday just before the beginning of Advent, called Christ the King Sunday. And Christ the King Sunday was intended to remind all Christians that no matter what anyone else said or claimed, their allegiance was to Jesus Christ rather than any earthly ruler. Since then, Christ the King Sunday has been embraced not just by the Catholic Church, but by virtually all forms of Christianity that observe the liturgical calendar. But there has been some pushback, especially in recent years. Not necessarily against the intention behind Christ the King Sunday, but against its name. For many people, and maybe you fall into this category, the title King feels antiquated and maybe even oppressive. The word king carries even more baggage this year than in years past. To be honest, I'm surprised that any American church has ever embraced the name Christ the King Sunday. Because for the past 250 years, America hasn't really been known for kings, right? Kings aren't really our vibe. But the language of kingship hasn't always been controversial. If we look back to the Old Testament, the people of Israel literally begged for a king in 1 Samuel. Give us a king so that we can be like everyone else, they said. Give us a king that will protect us from our enemies and fulfill our hopes and our dreams. And so what did God do? God gave Israel a king, but not without also giving them a warning. These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you, God says through the prophet Samuel. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and your female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. He will take, and he will take, and he will take, and he will take. Not for the good of all, but for the good of a few, if not just for the good of himself. And so, in 1776, we, the enlightened people of America, we finally listened to God's warning, and we did away with a king once and for all. No more taking, we said. No more pledging allegiance to a mere mortal. No more orienting our entire lives and our hopes and our dreams and our fears around who's in charge. We've moved past all that. We live in a strange world. We live in a world where we say we want no king, and yet we identify ourselves with the colors of the leaders we elect. We say that we want no king, and yet we describe even our churches with those same colors. That's a blue church. That is a red church, and we're a purple church. You see, I don't think that innate longing that Israel had for a leader and a protector ever went away. I don't think that desire for someone to fulfill our hopes and our dreams and protect us from our enemies ever went away. I'm not convinced that we don't want a king. And I'm definitely not convinced that we don't need a king. We just need a very, very, very different kind of king. And the gospel today describes a very different kind of king. One whose true identity isn't revealed at a coronation or even an inauguration, but at a crucifixion. We don't see Jesus seated on a throne, but hanging between two criminals. The royal guard isn't there to protect him, but is busy dividing his clothes and mocking him with sour wine. Jesus doesn't have thousands of adoring fans shouting his name, just a crowd of onlookers who've lost their voice from crying, "Crucify," moments earlier. Just as in his life, he redefined what it means to be human. On the cross, Jesus completely redefined what it means to be king. He takes everything that we thought we knew about this idea of kingship, and he turns it on its head. Other kings would have saved themselves. But on the cross, we see a king who refused to save himself so that he could save others. Other kings take and take and take, but on the cross, we see a king who gave and gave and gave, even to the point of death. Other kings benefit the few, if not just themselves, but on the cross we see a king who died not just for the criminal who repented, but also for the one who mocked. Not just for his followers, but also for the crowd. Not just for those who chose him, but also for those who chose to crucify him. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Christ the King Sunday reminds us that our future and the future of the world is in the hands of the crucified King. It reminds us that as his followers, we're defined not by the leaders we choose who take for themselves, but by the God who in self-giving chose us. We're reminded that the church isn't determined and defined by any color, but by a cross. If anyone ever had reason to be against the idea of kings, Karl Barth did. You all have heard me talk about Barth. He was a leader in the Confessing Church, which existed to oppose the pro-Nazi German evangelical church. And Bart lived through Mussolini. Bart lived through Hitler. And yet, at the end of his life, after all that he had experienced, because he knew that Christ was so unlike every other king, he saw the idea of Christ not as antiquated, not as oppressive, but as good news. On the evening of December 9th, 1968, Bart spoke on the phone with his friend Edward Thurneson. Bart died later that night. But according to Thurneson, these were his final words. Indeed, the world is dark. Still, let us not lose heart. Never. There is still someone who reigns. Not just in Moscow or in Washington or in Peking, but from above. From heaven. God is in command. That's why I'm not afraid. Let us stay confident even in the darkest moments. Let us not allow our hope to sink. Hope for all human beings, for all the nations of the world. God does not let us fall. Not a single one. And not all of us together. Someone reigns. Amen.